I was taken from my bed in the middle of the night. I'm 28 years old, male. I live right outside Chicago, over the border in northwest Indiana. I'm currently pursuing a Bachelor's of Applied Science at Purdue. I'm not exactly what you would call scientifically illiterate, and I consider myself fairly mentally sound. I've never had any problems on that front. I have only ever openly discussed this once before, on a random Quora question that caught my eye. Also anonymously, so I'm still not very good at discussing it openly, and only 2 people who know me know what happened to me. I had avoided talking about it for a long time, fearing the stigma associated with the topic, especially in the professional and scientific communities. I was also immensely relieved that the 2 people I did open up to about it believed me unquestioningly, and the result of that is me typing this here today. All that being said, I've been trying for a few years to come to terms with something that happened to me. It was almost 5 years ago to the day, shortly after my 23rd birthday. My father is very sick, so I was staying with my parents at the time to help take care of him and the house. I awoke in the middle of the night. It was warm, but I could hear and feel the breeze from the fans I need on to go to sleep. I reached over and grabbed my phone, checked the time. It was 3:31 a.m. I put the phone back down and tried to get settled back into a comfortable position. However, after a moment, I realized I could hear and feel a humming. I knew right away it wasn't coming from my fans. It was very deep, and I could actually feel it in my body. Our house is by some train tracks, so at first I thought it just might be a train, but I quickly realized that wasn't it either. While I was lying in bed wondering what it was, I noticed for the first time that my door was open. My door is never open during the night. Hell, even during the day. Never, ever. And I could see a light shining down the hallway and into my room. At first, I thought maybe my dad was going to the bathroom and had his flashlight out, but then I realized the light was wrong. It wasn't the right color. As I watched, it started to get brighter, until it looked like someone had set up a white-blue LED array at the end of the hall in the kitchen. As the light got brighter, so did the humming. I tried to jump up to go investigate, fearing an intruder, when I realized I couldn't move. Well, let me clarify. I could move my hands, my neck, my feet, but it felt like someone had placed straps all over my limbs and torso. After a brief moment of transcendent terror and confusion, I thought to myself, okay, maybe this is sleep paralysis. I've of course read about it before, but never experienced anything like this. Right after that thought, I realized I could no longer feel the bed under me. I started rising in the air and gently floating, for lack of a better word, to my door and the light. I know how this sounds, but I'm 110% serious. Please, just stay with me. As I levitated through the doorway and into the hall, I had a clear view into my parents' room. Their door is right next to mine on the left-hand side of the hall when walking out of my room. If you take a step out, turn 90 degrees and take another step, you're in their room. Anyway, I could see them lying on the bed. I started screaming, begging for help. They didn't move. In fact, I couldn't even see them breathing, and at that moment, I was convinced they were dead, and I was about to be next. This moment of pure, unadulterated panic caused something to snap. In the blink of an eye, I found I could move my arms again, and I flailed impotently in the air. I eventually got my hands to the door frame and clung on for dear life. I gripped that frame like my life depended on it, because in that moment, I wholeheartedly believed that it did. To my dismay, I realized that my fingers were slowly starting to slip as I continued to be pulled inexorably down the hall towards the kitchen. I dug my nails in as hard as I could to try and stop it, and in a quick burst of pain and terror, I lost my grip and continued to float. Typing this part makes me feel ridiculous. I know how it sounds. A few more seconds of terrifying levitation and I was in the kitchen, floating with the top of my head facing our back door. It's a large sliding glass door, and I could see that this is where the light was shining in from. Something that felt about as bright as the sun was hovering right above our pool. We have a large in-ground pool almost smack dab in the middle of our backyard, which is entirely fenced in with a 10-foot privacy fence. Whatever this was had to be directly over the water, maybe a couple of feet off the ground. I took all of this in within a heartbeat and was still in a state of terror I will never be able to adequately explain when I felt the breeze. My back door was wide open, but for the life of me, I can't tell you if it had been open all along or if it had just been opened in front of me. At that moment, I slowly began to settle back down to the floor. I felt the cold floor on my back as my shirt was lifted slightly. Right as I touched the ground, I saw them. If I thought I had been afraid before, it was nothing compared to this moment right here. One stepped in and took a step to stand over me at my left side. It looked down at me, and even from my perspective on the floor, I could tell this thing was extremely tall. If I had to guess, I would say 7'10", 8 feet at the very least. We have 9-foot ceilings in the kitchen, and its head was shockingly close to the ceiling. The light was so painfully bright at this moment that I didn't get to take in a whole lot of detail, as it was kind of shadowed by the light behind us. 2 more stepped in and took place to either side of my shoulders, standing by the door, almost like guards would. Keep in mind that this all happened fairly quickly, and in this moment, I began to have an idea of what this is. The terror is unspeakable. I remember thinking that they don't look anything how they're often portrayed in the movies. They were skeletal, and their skin looked like it was, well, I have no idea, but it didn't really look like our skin. It was just strange. The one standing to the left of me had something in his hand. As I turned my neck to get a better view, I could take in a little more of its form. Its fingers. Christ. I can't even describe what those fingers did to me. They were almost spider-like. Way too long and way too many joints. To this day, that's probably the one image that sticks out the most. It was clutching this black, maybe gunmetal or dark silver. Hard to tell because it was smooth like glass and the light was obscuring it a lot. But it reminded me almost of an iPhone without any power. But it was thinner, shaped almost like a remote or a very short rod with a squarish shape with round edges. Just a smooth, glass-like thing. Its fingers moved over it, and every muscle on my body tensed up. Air shot into my lungs as they were expanded all the way, and every single limb shot straight out. It was like I was a plank of wood. My jaw was clenched so tight that I thought my teeth would shatter. I lost all control. The only thing I can move at this point were my eyes, and even then, very little. It was like the signals from my nervous system were completely disrupted, and other foreign signals were imposed in their place. The 2 standing behind me shuffled forward a bit, and started to rise back up again. I feel fingers on my shoulders, and I begin to hover out the door. And the second I get out the door, the light is so overwhelmingly powerful, and then nothing. I wake up in my bed. It's 5:45 a.m. I'm sweating bullets. My stomach hurts. I get up and start going about my morning routine. I try to shrug off the experience as a dream, and it works. When I'm about to get into the shower, I notice a sharp pain. I look in the mirror. I have bruises everywhere. Arms, ankles, thighs, but the worst of them are on my shoulders and back. Very, very clearly were what looked like handprints, albeit elongated ones. I throw up almost instantly. I try to pull myself together and head back into my room. I see my door frame. I see the scratches. I see they line up with my fingers. I see the wood and blood under my fingernails. I have never entirely come to terms with any of it. My fiance has encouraged me to share, but it still feels deeply uncomfortable and jarring just to walk through it. As I've typed this, my hands have dropped to what feels like sub-zero temperatures, and my whole body is shaking. I'm sure if I asked my fiance, she would tell me I'm also extremely pale, even more than usual. This is what happens every time I think about it. After many nights spent doing research, watching YouTube videos of ufologist conferences, reading people's reports, the same thing always happens. Physiological response every time. My own high strangeness experience that was a major turning point in my life when it came to accepting and believing paranormal phenomenon. I have epilepsy. The official diagnosis is partial epilepsy. When I was 9 years old, I got into a really bad sledding accident that gave me a terrible concussion. I was out cold for a few minutes. When I hit puberty, I started having stress-induced seizures and blackouts in memory. We went to a neurologist, and after some tests and discussions, they hypothesized that my brain growing and changing after that serious head trauma was causing me to have seizures. The neurologist assured me that most likely I would grow out of them as I got older, and I have for the most part. I'm 27 now and went from having about 2 a year, even while on medicine, to just 1 in the last 2 years, with my only medicine being CBD. And so that was that. I'm typing up this story today because I thought you guys would appreciate it. There's an ongoing trend of epilepsy and religious experiences that researchers are beginning to quantify, and I actually participated in one with the University of Pennsylvania, recounting for them the same story I will tell you now. To this day, I have no other explanation for it other than my account of what happened in the story. So here we go. I grew up in a small, rural, bumblecrap farm town in the Pinelands of New Jersey. To outsiders visiting for the first time, they'll make jokes like, "Gee, am I in Kentucky?" etc. My hometown's main draw for outsiders is a large state forest with a lake for swimming and tons of hiking and camping. Growing up, I used to ride my bike around this park with friends, or often just come home from school and ride it alone to get some exercise. On a day about 11 years ago, I was riding my bike through the state park trails all alone. It was late fall, and there were leaves everywhere. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, I got an aura. Auras are your body's way of telling you that you're going to have a seizure. They can last for seconds, minutes, or hours, and everyone reports different auras. My traditional auras lasted for hours, and usually involved me having little blackouts and twitches. This one was different, and I've never had one like it since. And it sort of launched my interest into the paranormal. I was no longer an agnostic after that day. The trail I'm on is a paved road. It's an access road for cars, campers, and also connects to a road outside the park, so is frequently used for through traffic. As I'm biking, all of a sudden, I feel a hand very lightly touch my shoulder. Like, as I'm biking, I'm moving, and I tried to turn to see, but I literally could not. I was stuck looking forward. An absolute ethereal calmness comes over me, the likes of which I have never experienced before or since. I smiled. I remember grinning and being so content that somehow this hand was on my shoulder when I was riding my bike. A female voice then whispers in my left ear in the calmest, warmest voice I've ever heard. "You're going to have a seizure, and you're going to be okay." About a mile down the road, there's a big pile of leaves that, presumably, the park service had raked up. After this female voice whispered in my ear, I woke up in this pile of leaves, a quarter mile from where I first felt the being. I use being instead of angel here because it's more inclusive, and I honestly have no idea what it was. Was it just my subconscious brain putting on a show for my conscious brain to put my ego at ease? I, to this day, do not believe that because I've never had any other experiences like it. And I've had countless more seizures since then. Statistically, an aura like it would have happened to me again. I woke up in this pile of leaves, without a scratch on me. My bike was on the other side of the road. Not a twisted heap of metal, but instead leaning neatly on a tree, like I had done it intentionally. There were no other piles of leaves or anything around the park that could have protected me from injury. This was it. And there was absolutely no one around in the park that day. If I had seized up on a bike on an asphalt road, I very well could have died. Left into the park until some local or ranger drove down that road. And it was the strangest my body has ever felt from a seizure, because I was at peace. I was giggling in disbelief, but also happy it happened, confused, bewildered, blessed. I ended up just shouting thank you to the sky. I hid this story from my parents and my friends for 6 or 7 years, finally spilling the beans for the UPenn study. It was absolutely surreal. I have never felt more peace in my life, while simultaneously feeling more confused than ever. Many people report religious experiences with their seizures, whether it be similar guardian angel type encounters, or seeing dimensional beings, or having weird synchronicities in their life after seizures. Some epileptics will report having deja vu that lasts for minutes or even hours. Epilepsy is not a very well understood neurological disorder. Some of the best epileptic drugs on the market are also used to treat schizophrenia or depression. How these drugs work entirely isn't totally understood. We just know they work. Anyway, just wanted to share this high strangeness encounter. Years later, I would do DMT, further cementing my belief in extra-dimensional beings. To me, this was not a hallucination. I know others will tell me it was. They can believe that, but they weren't there, and I wasn't conscious to see what was really happening. Truthfully, no one can ever know what happened to me that day. I don't even know what happened that day, but something highly strange happened that day, and I'm 100% sure it saved my life. I died in late 2015. I was given a second chance. I've never used Reddit before, but a friend of mine was talking to me about the Glitch in the Matrix subreddit, so I decided to share my story here since I don't have any explanation for it almost 3 years later. Rewind back to September 2015. I was a freshman who had just entered high school 2 weeks prior. Already, school was weighing down on me, and I'd been continuing a habit I had of going on walks to clear my mind. On this day, I'd been walking around a pond near my house. There's a trail that goes around the pond, and then the trail leads up to a set of abandoned train tracks on the other side, which sit about 15 feet above the path and pond below. After walking the circle, I was crossing the train tracks when I decided I wanted some ice cream. The fastest way to get to the ice cream shop was to take the path below the train tracks, but there isn't any way to cross the pond without going all the way back around, and being 14 years old, I decided that I could just jump from the tracks onto the path below and keep walking. Looking down from above, it didn't seem to be that far of a jump, so that's what I did. The next thing I remember after that was being half conscious in an ambulance. Everything was extremely blurry, and the paramedics sounded slightly panicked. I wasn't able to move either of my legs, so I think they were both broken. This scene continued on for a few minutes, until we arrived at the hospital and I was wheeled into the emergency room on a stretcher. I only had a few minutes in emergency before I eventually lost all consciousness, and that was the last thing I saw. After I'd been unconscious for what felt like about an hour, I opened my eyes and I was on the ground. I'd just hit the ground after jumping, but this time I was fully conscious. I hadn't noticed this before I jumped, but there had been a car parked watching me, and the people in it had jumped out and called an ambulance for me. The ambulance ride had been the exact same as it was the first time, and I was put into the same ambulance room that I had died in before. The only difference between the two events were that I was fully conscious this time, and my injuries were much more minor. I was discharged from the hospital that same night with only stitches on my lip, a slightly fractured jaw, and a mild concussion. For a while after this, I assumed that the first scenario had just been a weirdly coincidental dream that I had while I was unconscious, so I didn't consider it anything abnormal. It wasn't until a few weeks after when my mom told me that the people who had helped me said that I had been conscious the entire time. I hadn't been knocked out after hitting the ground or anything, so that entire scenario managed to happen in the few seconds it took for me to hit the ground, while I was still conscious. Anyways, I'm not very good at describing things, especially with how blurry this day was now that it was years ago, but I'm 17 now, and I still have no way to explain what happened that day, other than I died, and was given a second chance.